But FDR's successor, Truman, Stalin really didn't like. Um, and, the Cold War ended up happening as it did. But in terms of World War II, do you think Truman did a good job assuming the presidency, leading the U.S. through the conclusion of World War II?
I believe he did. And one major decision was that whether we should drop the atomic bomb on Japan. Uh, One thing that many within our nation do not understand is what was the real reason that we employed that bomb when we did. But when you take a look at the figures of our naval losses during the Battle of the Philippines, our naval losses during the battle for Okinawa, two key island chains within the Pacific. But most importantly, our loss on something that we're going to be commemorating next month, and that is the Battle of Iwo Jima. It's an island that's 5 miles by 3 miles in length. So it's 8 square miles. And we truly believe, by the way, that island is part of Imperial Japan at that particular time. It was considered part of uh, the domain. The Japanese placed on board that island some 22,000 Japanese soldiers, and they knew that they needed to keep that island underneath their control. One, because if they lost it, it would undermine the morale of Imperial Japan. But number two, the Americans could utilize it as an air base to further attack the Japanese home islands. So that's the reason why they had on that 8 square miles 22,000 soldiers. We did not know that. We felt there were definitely a much smaller number of troops on that small island that we could very easily move in and overtake. Jake, we did move in February of 1945, and it became the costliest battle we ever fought in terms of military lives lost. Costliest battle we ever fought because of the determination by those Japanese on that island to hold against our military. And they effectively did for a good 2 weeks long. Good 2 weeks long. Ultimately, we overcame it, but at great loss in terms of manpower. It's the costliest piece of any battlefield that we ever fought on. Costliest piece of any battlefield.
Yeah, it was brutal. Horrible, horrible, horrible fighting. I can't even imagine.
Right, but with that being the case, being February 1945, with all these major losses uh, that we incurred, Battle of Leyte Gulf, Battle of off Okinawa, one of the major reasons why we lost so many ships and so many men is because of a new weapon that the Japanese began to employ in that region. What do you think that new weapon was?
The kamikaze.
Kamikaze, Jake. Right. So keeping in mind that if indeed we're ever going to attack Imperial Japan to eventually eliminate it as a military threat, Truman knew it was going to take not weeks, not months, but years to overcome Imperial Japan. And with our losses due to the kamikaze, our losses due to what happened on Iwo Jima, it's he that makes that determination to, yes, employ the atomic bomb and bring about the death toll within Imperial Japan, with, in essence, avoiding, therefore, us suffering such a death toll loss.
I do think it was the right decision. And I think that Truman is one of the most important, consequential, and possibly best presidents we've had, and one of the most important figures in world history because of this decision. And Truman fascinates me because of all of this. And then he goes on in the Korean War, and despite intense pressure to drop atomic bombs, he decides not to. And I think that is such an important decision for the future of the world. So I'm looking forward to reading, first of all, Truman's memoirs and also books on Truman. I would love to have a Truman scholar on the podcast to talk about that. But I do think Truman made the right decision. The cost of a mainland invasion of Japan would have been catastrophic, but also this may sound draconian, but we now know the devastating power of atomic weapons. If they had never been dropped, think of today with the vastly exponential power of thermonuclear weapons that we have now. At least we know the effects of atomic and nuclear weapons. And it shaped our understanding and policy of nuclear weapons going forward, which I think is also it's an unfortunate aspect because obviously hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians died, which is tragic and horrible. But for the future of humanity, at least we know the effects um, of the atomic bomb.
Jake, so that, with that being the case, that's the fortunate side of the employment of that weapon. We come to understand its brutality. We understand the the amount of damage that it can cause within a particular region. One thing about Truman, because of his leadership, he's listed as the fifth most effective president within U.S. history. I'm not going to mention the other four, but he's now listed as number 5.
I think that's appropriate, and I'm very much so looking forward to diving into the literature and memoirs of Truman. Can you imagine? Put yourself in Truman's shoes for a minute. This guy's vice president of what's widely regarded as one of the best presidents of all time. Definitely, probably one of the most consequential. Um, Approval rating through the roof for FDR. And tragically, suddenly FDR dies, and Truman all of a sudden has to assume the presidency during the greatest global conflict in world history. Then he learns about this little Manhattan project that's been going on that he didn't know about, developing these weapons of mass destruction unlike anything that's ever been seen before. And then he has to make the decision on whether to employ those weapons. I mean, the amount of pressure that was put on his shoulders is enormous.
Okay, but Jake, again, now just keep in mind what we had just discussed the impact of Iwo Jima, the impact of the use of kamikazes against our Navy in 2 major battles where our losses were just phenomenal. He took it all into case, all into consideration. And it's his judgment that comes forth and says, let's employ the bomb. He did not want Americans to suffer any further loss, any further damage, like we had just suffered at Iwo Jima and those 2 naval battles that I just mentioned.
Right. And I think he made the right decision. And I think that's why he's such a great man who I would love to study further.